The wind was a blade against the cabin walls. It had been howling for 2 days straight, piling snow in drifts higher than a man's head. Out here, a storm like this wasn't just weather. It was a sentence, a cage made of ice and fury. I was used to it. The silence inside was a world away from the violence outside. It was a silence I'd cultivated for 5 hard years. Then came the knock. It wasn't the sharp rap of a traveler who knows his destination. It was a soft, desperate thud, almost a collapse against the timber. I froze, my hand hovering over the tin cup of coffee on the table. Nobody knocks in a blizzard. Nobody's even out there to knock. My rifle was leaning against the wall, right where it always was. I didn't move toward it, not yet. I just listened. The wind screamed, and then, again, thud. Fainter this time. I walked to the door, the floorboards groaning under my boots. I put my eye to the peephole I'd drilled, a small circle of clarity in a world gone white. I saw nothing but a swirl of snow. Then a shape shifted. A figure draped in a tattered cloak, huddled against the frame. I pulled the heavy bar from its brackets. The wind tore the door from my hand, slamming it inward. And there she was. She fell more than stumbled across the threshold, a gasp of frozen air escaping her lips before she crumpled to the floor. She was young, maybe 20, and under the soaked, miserable rags, her belly was swollen. Pregnant. Very pregnant. I stared down at her, the snow swirling into my home, melting on the floorboards. My first instinct, the one that had kept me alive this long, was to shut the door. On her, on the storm, on whatever trouble she was dragging behind her. I stood there, hand on the cold wood, the wind trying to rip the warmth from my cabin. I said nothing. Then I closed the door and bolted it shut. She was unconscious, her breath a shallow puff in the sudden warmth. I dragged her away from the door and closer to the hearth. Her skin was a pale bluish white. Her cloak was frozen stiff. I worked the coarse fabric off her shoulders and saw the dress underneath. It was finer than anything I'd seen in years, made of dark blue wool, but torn at the hem and stained with mud. This wasn't some farmer's wife who'd lost her way. This was different. I put a kettle on the fire, waited. The cabin was small, a bed in one corner, a table, 2 chairs, and the stone fireplace that was the heart of the whole operation. Her presence filled the space, swallowing the familiar silence. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Every tick of the clock on the mantelpiece sounded like a hammer blow. After an hour, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. They were wide and filled with a terror so pure it felt like a physical thing in the room. She tried to sit up, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "Easy now," I said. My voice was rough, like a rusty hinge. I hadn't used it for much more than cursing at stubborn mules in months. She flinched at the sound. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the rough-hewn walls, the drying herbs hanging from the rafters, the rifle prop near the door. She was cataloging threats, and she was looking at me like I was the biggest one. I held out a cup of warm broth. She stared at it, then at me. Her lips were cracked and pale. She didn't take it. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "The man who opened the door," I said. "Drink this." She hesitated, then her hands trembled as she reached for the cup. She took a sip, then another, the warmth seeming to bring a flicker of life back to her. I went back to my chair by the fire, watching her. There were 100 questions buzzing in my head. Where did you come from? Who are you with? What kind of trouble are you in? But I asked none of them. Questions were baggage, and I traveled light. She finished the broth and set the cup down. Her eyes were still wary, but the raw panic had faded. "The storm, it's not letting up," I said. "Could be days." She pulled the thin blanket I'd put over her tighter. "My husband, he was with me. Our wagon, it broke an axle. He went for help." It was a clean story, a simple story, the kind people tell when the truth is messy. I looked out the small window, at the solid wall of white. No man could survive out there for more than an hour. If there ever was a husband, he was gone now. I nodded slowly, my face giving away nothing. That was the first lie she told me. I knew it was a lie, but I let it hang in the air between us. It was her shield, and maybe she needed it. "You can take the cot," I said, gesturing to the corner. "It's not much, but it's warm." She gave me a grateful, fearful look and slowly made her way to it, clutching the blanket like a lifeline. I turned my attention back to the fire, feeding it another log. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was heavier. It was filled with the things we weren't saying. The next day passed in much the same way. The blizzard didn't relent. We barely spoke. I did my chores, splitting wood in the attached shed, checking the traps near the cabin, melting snow for water. She stayed by the fire, sometimes sleeping, sometimes just staring into the flames. I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. I was doing the same to her. I noticed things. A small silver locket tucked into the collar of her dress. The way her hands, though chapped and raw now, were soft underneath, like they weren't used to hard labor. And once I saw her slip something from a hidden pocket in her cloak and hold it tight in her fist. It was small, metallic, a key maybe. She hid it again quickly when she saw me glance over. Every move she made was careful, deliberate. She was a woman who was used to being watched. On the third day, the wind finally began to die down. The howling became a low moan. "We might be able to dig out by tomorrow." A part of me was relieved. The other part, I wasn't sure what it felt. She was mending a tear in one of my shirts, her needlework neat and precise. Her name, she told me, was Ilara. Just Ilara, no last name. Another piece of a story left untold. "You're a good hand with a needle," I said, breaking the quiet. She jumped, startled. "My mother taught me." She didn't look up from her work. "She said a lady ought to know how." A lady. The word hung in the air. That confirmed it. She wasn't from around here. Not from the hard-scrabble homesteads or the dusty little towns in this territory. Later that afternoon it happened. She was standing trying to stretch the stiffness from her back when she cried out. A sharp, piercing sound. She grabbed her belly, her face contorted in pain. "What is it?" I asked, already on my feet. "The baby," she gasped, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. "It's coming." The storm outside had started to fade, but a new one, a much more terrifying one, was just beginning right here in my cabin. I was a homesteader. I knew how to set a bone, stitch a wound, even deliver a calf in a pinch. But a human baby? This was a blizzard I didn't know how to survive. Her contractions came fast and hard. There was no time to go for help, even if the snow wasn't chest deep. We were on our own. All the unspoken questions, all the tension between us, it all melted away. There was only this raw, primal reality. "Breathe," I told her, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just breathe." I boiled water. I tore up my cleanest sheets. I did the things I'd seen in books, the things I'd heard old-timers talk about. But knowing and doing are two different mountains. The hours blurred into a haze of pained cries and muttered reassurances. She was strong, stronger than she looked. In the midst of the agony, there was a core of steel in her. Night fell. The only sounds were her strained breathing and the crackle of the fire. At one point, she grabbed my hand, her grip like iron. "Don't let me die," she pleaded, her eyes locking onto mine. "Please." "I won't," I promised, and I meant it. Just before dawn, with the first pale light filtering through the window, the baby came. A boy, small and red and squalling, but alive. He was breathing. He was perfect. I cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft piece of flannel. I handed him to his mother. Ilara was exhausted, pale as a ghost, but when she looked at her son, a light came into her eyes that chased away all the shadows. She held him to her chest and wept, not from pain, but from a relief so profound it shook her whole body. I stepped back, giving them a moment. The cabin was quiet again, but this was a new kind of silence. It was filled with the soft sounds of a newborn and his mother's gentle shushing. The world had shrunk to this single room, and in it, something new had begun. The blizzard had broken. The sky outside was a clear, cold blue. The immediate danger was over. But I had a feeling the real trouble was just getting started. I watched her with the child. A fierce, protective look had replaced the fear in her eyes. I let them rest for most of the day. I shoveled a path from the door to the woodshed, the clean, cold air a shock after the intensity of the cabin. The world was white and still, deceptively peaceful. When I came back inside, she was awake, nursing the baby. "He needs a name," she said softly, not looking at me. "That's your business," I replied, stoking the fire. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm not who I said I was." I didn't turn around. "I know. There was no wagon, no husband who went for help." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "My husband is alive, and he is hunting me." Now I turned. I looked at her, this small woman with her newborn son, and saw the truth of her fear. This wasn't just a woman who'd gotten lost. This was a woman on the run. "Why?" I asked. Just the one word. She clutched the silver locket at her neck. With trembling fingers, she opened it. She held it out to me. "Because of him." I walked over and took it. Inside the locket, there were two tiny painted portraits. One was of her, looking younger, happier. The other was a man with cold eyes, a severe jaw, and a face I knew all too well. It was Marcus Thorne, the man who owned the town of Redemption, 10 miles down the valley. The man who owned the bank, the saloon, the general store. The man who was systematically buying up or forcing out every homesteader in this territory, squeezing us until we had nothing left. He'd made me an offer for my land a year ago, an offer that felt more like a threat. I looked from the portrait to her. "You're Thorne's wife." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "He didn't want the baby. He said it wasn't his." "Is it?" My voice was flat. It shouldn't matter to me, but it did. "No," she whispered. "It isn't. But Marcus doesn't know the truth. He just knows it's not his." The pieces started to click into place. Thorne was a man obsessed with his name, his legacy. A wife bearing another man's child? He wouldn't stand for it. He'd see it as the ultimate betrayal. A man like Thorne wouldn't just cast her out. He would erase the problem, her and the baby. "He thinks I'm dead," she said, her voice barely audible. "He sent a man to take care of it." On the road from the city, I escaped. I've been running for a week. Running into the worst blizzard in a decade. It had saved her life and dropped her on my doorstep. I handed the locket back to her. My mind was racing. Thorne's wife. Here in my cabin. If he ever found out, he wouldn't just come for her. He'd come for me too. He'd burn this place to the ground with me inside it. The smart thing to do would be to send her on her way as soon as the snow cleared enough for travel. Point her west and wish her luck. But I looked at the baby, sleeping soundly in her arms, his tiny fist curled around her finger. He was innocent in all of this, and she was just a terrified girl. My whole life I'd learned one rule: mind your own business. It was the only way to survive in a place like this. Don't get involved. Don't pick sides. Just keep your head down. But she wasn't just some stranger anymore. I had delivered her child. My hands were the first to hold him. We were bound by something now, whether I liked it or not. "He'll have men looking for you," I said. "As soon as the passes are clear, they'll be everywhere." "I know," she said, her gaze fixed on me. "There's something else." She reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out the small metallic object I'd seen her hiding. She placed it on the table between us. It was a key, a heavy, ornate brass key. "Not for a house. This is what he really wants," she said. "It's why he couldn't just let me go. This key opens his private deposit box at the bank in Redemption. It holds everything. The real ledgers, the forged deeds to the lands he's stolen, the proof of all his crimes." My blood ran cold. The forged deeds. My own plot of land, the one my father had broken his back to clear, was one of the last holdouts Thorne hadn't managed to get his hands on. "I always suspected he was playing a crooked game. He told me he had the original deed to your land," she said, as if reading my mind. "He was planning to force you out next spring." Suddenly, this wasn't her problem anymore. It was mine. That key changed everything. It wasn't just about a woman and her baby now. It was about my home, my land, the only thing I had left in this world. Helping her wasn't just an act of charity. It was an act of war. "We can't stay here," I said, my decision made. "Thorne's reach is long. We have to get you, the baby, and that key to the U.S. Marshal over in Stone Creek. It's the only way." Stone Creek was 50 miles away over the treacherous Widow's Pass. A hard journey in good weather. In the aftermath of a blizzard, it would be borderline suicide. But staying here was a guaranteed death sentence. "When do we leave?" she asked, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Tomorrow. At first light," I said. "Get some rest. You'll need it." She nodded, clutching the baby a little tighter. For the first time since she arrived, she looked at me not with fear, but with a fragile trust. It was a heavier burden than any sack of grain. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the fire, cleaning my rifle, the weight of my choice settling on me. I was a man who had sought out solitude to escape the past. And now the world, with all its violence and complications, had not only knocked on my door, I had invited it in. I looked over at Alara and the child, sleeping on the cot. A strange, unfamiliar feeling stirred in my chest. It wasn't pity. It was something else. A sense of purpose. For the first time in 5 years, I was fighting for something more than just my own survival. I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, this was a chance at some kind of redemption. I was wrong. It wasn't redemption that was coming. It was a reckoning. The next morning broke clear and blindingly bright. The snow reflected the sun with a painful intensity. I packed what we'd need: dried meat, hardtack, blankets, and my last box of cartridges. Ilara bundled the baby until he was a tiny, warm cocoon. She moved with a new determination, the exhaustion from the birth pushed aside by the urgency of our situation. "My horse is strong," I told her. "She can carry the two of you. I'll walk alongside." She just nodded, her face grim. I went out to the lean-to that served as my barn. My mare, Bess, whinnied softly as I approached. She was a sturdy, reliable animal, the best purchase I'd ever made. I saddled her up, checked the straps, and then went to get my rifle from the hooks where I kept it, right by the barn door. That's when I saw it. A scratch in the wood near the trigger guard. A fresh one. I frowned, running my thumb over it. I was meticulous with my rifle. I never banged it around. I lifted it down and worked the lever action. It felt stiff, too stiff. I broke the rifle down, my hands moving with practiced speed, and my heart dropped into my stomach. A small, carefully placed wedge of metal had been jammed deep into the firing mechanism. It was subtle. You wouldn't notice it unless you knew what to look for. It wouldn't stop the lever from moving, but it would stop the firing pin from ever striking the cartridge. The rifle was useless. It had been sabotaged. I stood there in the cold silence of the barn, the useless pieces of my rifle in my hands. My blood ran cold. The blizzard had ended yesterday. The path to my cabin was impassable until this morning. Whoever did this had to have been here before the storm, or during it. But who? No one ever came out this far. Then a memory surfaced. A drifter, a man named Silas, had passed through about 2 weeks ago. He was looking for work, said his horse had gone lame. I gave him a meal and a bed in the barn for the night. He'd asked a lot of questions, too many, about my land, my trips to town, how often I got visitors. I thought he was just lonely. I sent him on his way the next morning and forgot all about him. He must have been one of Thorne's spies. He'd scouted me out. Maybe he'd even been watching the cabin, lurking nearby, and saw Alara arrive. My stomach twisted into a knot. We weren't just running from a threat that was miles away in redemption. The threat was already here. They knew she was with me. I walked back to the cabin, trying to keep my face calm. Ilara looked up, a question in her eyes. "We're not leaving," I said, my voice low. "Not yet." "What is it? What's wrong?" I showed her the small piece of metal. "Someone sabotaged my rifle. We've been watched." The hope drained from her face, replaced by that familiar look of terror. She hugged the baby closer. "He knows. Marcus knows I'm here." "He knows," I agreed. "And he's not just sending men to look. He's sending them to finish a job." We were trapped. The horse was no good for a fighting retreat, not with a woman and a newborn. Our only defense was a useless rifle and my hunting knife. The cabin, my sanctuary, had become a cage. "What do we do?" she whispered. I looked around the small room. My eyes landed on the heavy oak table, the woodpile, the shutters on the windows. "We make our stand here." There was no other choice. Running was suicide. Hiding was impossible. The only path forward was to fight. For the next few hours we worked. I barred the door and reinforced it with the table. I boarded up the two small windows, leaving only tiny slits to see and shoot through, if I could even get the rifle working. Ilara, despite her weakness, helped me move furniture, her face set with grim resolve. We were a two-person army against a force we couldn't see. As I worked, I tried desperately to fix the rifle. The wedge was jammed in deep. I used my knife, a piece of wire, anything I could find. My frustration grew with every failed attempt. It was no use. The saboteur had done his job well. "There's a pistol," she said suddenly. I stopped my work and looked at her. "In my bag. It's small, but it's loaded." She retrieved a small, pearl-handled Derringer from her satchel. It was a lady's gun. More of a threat in a card game than a real gunfight, but it was better than nothing. It held two shots. Two shots against Thorn and however many men he was bringing. The sun reached its peak in the sky. The waiting was the worst part. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every shadow seemed to be a man with a gun. The baby, sensing his mother's tension, began to fuss. Ilara rocked him gently, her soft humming a stark contrast to the grim reality of our situation. Then through the slit in the window board, I saw them. 4 riders, black specks against the white snow, moving steadily toward the cabin. They weren't hurrying. They knew we were here. They knew we were trapped. One rider sat taller in the saddle, his posture arrogant and commanding even from a distance. Marcus Thorn. He'd come himself. This wasn't just business for him. This was personal. They stopped about 100 yards out, just beyond effective pistol range. Thorn dismounted, his long duster coat sweeping behind him. He stood there, staring at the cabin, a dark figure of judgment in a world of white. "Jedediah!" His voice boomed, cutting through the still air. "Jedediah Hale! I know you're in there, and I know who you're hiding." I stood by the window, my knuckles white as I gripped the useless rifle. Alara huddled in the corner, shielding the baby with her body. "Send out my wife, Hale!" Thorn shouted. "And I'll let you live. I have no quarrel with you. My business is with her and the bastard she's carrying. Give them to me, and you can keep your miserable plot of land." His words were a lie, and we both knew it. He would leave no witnesses. I remained silent. My silence was my answer. A cruel smile spread across Thorn's face. He turned and said something to one of his men. The man nodded, dismounted, and unstrapped something from his horse. A can. Kerosene. My heart hammered in my chest. He wasn't going to storm the cabin. He was going to burn us out. "Last chance, Hale," Thorn yelled. "Don't die for a whore and a child that isn't even hers." "What does he mean?" I muttered, more to myself than to Alara. But she answered. Her voice was trembling, broken. "He knows." "Knows what?" I demanded, turning to face her. "The baby," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "It's not just that he's not Marcus's son. He's his nephew." I stared at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Marcus has a younger brother, or had one. His name was Samuel," she explained, her words rushing out in a torrent of guilt and grief. "He was a good man, kind. He saw what Marcus was doing to people, how he was stealing their land. He was gathering proof to expose him. We fell in love." The puzzle pieces snapped together with horrifying clarity. "This is Samuel's son," she said, looking down at the sleeping infant. "Samuel was going to take me away. We were going to leave together. But Marcus found out. He killed him. He staged it to look like a hunting accident. The key, the deposit box, the proof. It wasn't hers. It was Samuel's. She was trying to finish what the man she loved had started." Outside, Thorn's voice cut through the air again, dripping with venom. "Did she tell you about my brother, Hale? Did she tell you how she seduced him and turned him against his own family? That child is the last trace of a traitor, and I will see it wiped from this earth." His men were advancing, 2 of them, circling the cabin from opposite sides. One of them carried the kerosene can. They were going to douse the walls. We were out of time, and out of options. The man with the kerosene reached the side of the cabin, just below the window. I could hear the sloshing of the liquid. There was nowhere to run. I looked at Alara, her face a mask of despair. I looked at the child in her arms. I thought about the lie I'd been living for 5 years, hiding from the world, hiding from the memory of another fire. The smell of kerosene seeped through the walls. "Stay down," I told her, my voice eerily calm. I picked up the small derringer. 2 shots. I went to the door, took a deep breath, and lifted the bar. The smell hit me first. Pungent, oily. The man was splashing the last of the kerosene onto the front porch. He had his back to me. Thorne and the others were watching, waiting for the show. I had to make this count. I pushed the door open just enough to aim. The man heard the creak of the hinges and started to turn. My first shot caught him in the shoulder. He screamed and dropped the can, stumbling back. The second man on the other side of the cabin started firing his pistol wildly. Bullets thudded into the log walls. Thorne was yelling, surprised by my aggression. I had 1 shot left. Thorne was drawing his own pistol now. He was too far away. A derringer was a fool's weapon at this distance. But the man I'd shot was struggling to his feet, pulling his own gun. He was close. He was a threat. I aimed. I fired my last bullet. The man fell and didn't get up. But it was too late. One of the other men, the fourth one who had been holding the horses, had a lit torch. He threw it. It sailed through the air in a perfect, terrible arc and landed right on the kerosene-soaked porch. The world erupted in a whoosh of orange flame. Fire shot up the walls, consuming the dry timber with a hungry roar. Smoke instantly began to pour through the gaps in the door and windows. The heat was immense, suffocating. "The cellar!" I yelled, grabbing Alara's arm. I dragged her toward the back of the cabin, to the thick bearskin rug that covered the floor. I threw it aside, revealing a heavy trapdoor. I had dug it myself when I first built the place. A root cellar, a place to store food, and a last-ditch escape route. I yanked the door open. A rush of cool, earthy air came up to meet the smoke. "Get in! Now!" She didn't hesitate. She clutched the baby and scrambled down the rough ladder into the darkness below. I followed, pulling the heavy door shut just as a flaming beam crashed down from the ceiling onto the spot where we had been standing. We were plunged into almost total darkness, the only light coming from the thin cracks around the trap door, glowing a hellish orange. Above us, the sounds of my home being destroyed were deafening. The roar of the fire, the crack of splitting timber, the triumphant shouts of Thorne's men. The smoke was already starting to snake down into the cellar. It was a temporary reprieve, not a solution. "Is there another way out?" Ilara's voice was a panicked whisper in the dark. "Yes," I said, my voice tight, "but they'll be waiting for us." I crawled toward the back of the small cellar. My hands found the familiar rough stones of the far wall. For 3 years, a little at a time, I had been digging. I had tunneled out, shoring up the walls with timber, creating a narrow passage that exited 50 feet from the cabin, hidden in the dense thicket behind the woodpile. It was my secret. My paranoia had finally paid off. I pulled away the loose rocks that concealed the entrance. A sliver of clean, cold air cut through the smoke. "Stay behind me," I whispered, "and be quiet. The baby, can you keep him from crying?" She nodded, though I could barely see her. She adjusted the blankets around him, murmuring softly. The tunnel was tight. We crawled on our hands and knees, the damp earth cold against my skin. It was suffocating. I could hear Ilara's ragged breathing behind me. Above ground, the sounds were muffled now, but I could still hear the fire and the occasional shout. They would be searching the ashes soon, searching for our bones. We reached the end. I pushed aside the heavy, snow-covered brush that concealed the exit. I peered out. The cabin was a funeral pyre, a column of black smoke and angry flames against the pristine white landscape. Thorne and his 2 remaining men were standing there, watching it burn, their faces lit by the destructive glow. They were confident. They believed they had won. We had one chance, to slip away into the trees while they were distracted. "Now!" I breathed. We crawled out of the tunnel, moving low and fast. The snow was deep, slowing us down, but the woods were only 30 yards away, 30 yards to a chance at survival. We were almost there when it happened. The baby, startled by the sudden cold, let out a tiny, sharp cry. It was barely a sound, almost swallowed by the crackling of the fire. But Thorne's head snapped up. His eyes scanned the darkness, and they locked directly onto us. "There!" he roared. A gunshot cracked through the air. A bullet whizzed past my head, so close I felt the heat of it. We were exposed. We were out of time. I shoved Alara toward the trees. "Run! Don't stop!" Another shot. This one kicked up snow at her feet. She stumbled but kept moving, disappearing into the dark woods. I turned to face them. I had nothing but a hunting knife. Thorne and his men were starting toward me, spreading out, their pistols drawn. This was it. This was the end of the line. But as I stood there waiting for the bullet that would end my life, a rage I hadn't felt in 5 years began to burn hotter than the fire consuming my home. It was a cold, familiar rage, because I had been here before. Another fire, another man who thought he could take whatever he wanted, another life stolen from me. As Thorne advanced, a cruel sneer on his face, he had no idea who he was really dealing with. He didn't just burn down the cabin of a lonely homesteader, he had resurrected a ghost. 5 years ago, my name wasn't Jedediah Hale. I lived 200 miles south of here, on a small ranch with my wife Sarah and our 6-year-old daughter Lily. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Our land had a creek running through it, and a powerful railroad baron wanted that water. He made offers, then threats. We refused to sell. One night, we woke up to the smell of smoke. The barn was on fire. When I ran out to save the animals, they barred the door of the house from the outside. I watched, helpless, as the flames engulfed my home. I heard my family screaming. The official report called it an accident, a stray lantern. I knew better. I saw the men who did it, saw their faces in the firelight. But the baron owned the sheriff, the judge, everyone. There was no justice to be had. So I vanished. I left that life behind, took a new name, and walked into the wilderness until I found a place so isolated I thought the world could never touch me again. I built a fortress of solitude to house my grief. The man who burned my family alive, the man who took everything from me, his name was Marcus Thorne. He was younger then, more of a brute, working for that railroad baron. But the eyes were the same, cold, merciless. I had never forgotten that face. And now here he was, the monster from my past, delivered to my doorstep by fate. He didn't recognize me. To him, I was just some obstacle, another anonymous homesteader in his way. This was no longer about Alara's survival. It was no longer about a stolen key or forged deeds. This was about a ghost coming back to collect a debt. "You should have just taken my offer, Hale," Thorne shouted as he and his men closed in. "Now you die for nothing." "Not for nothing," I said, my voice a low growl. I pulled my knife. They laughed. 3 guns against 1 blade. The odds were a joke, but they didn't understand. I wasn't planning on winning. I was planning on taking him with me. But as I braced for their charge, I saw a flicker of movement in the trees behind them. Alara, she hadn't run. She had circled around. In her hand was a thick, heavy branch, a makeshift club. Her face was a mask of feral desperation. She was coming back for me. Her loyalty, her courage, it was a fool's move. And it changed my calculus completely. I couldn't just die here. I had to get her and that child to safety. I did the only thing I could. I ran. I turned and bolted, not toward the woods where Alara was, but in the opposite direction, drawing them away from her. The snow was deep, my boots sinking with every step. It was like running through molasses. "Get him!" Thorne screamed. They gave chase. Bullets snapped past me, tearing through the branches of the pines. I was a target in a shooting gallery. But I knew this land. Every rock, every hollow, every game trail. They were on my turf now. I led them up a steep ridge, toward a narrow pass choked with deadfall and rock slides. It was treacherous footing, and the darkness was deepening as dusk settled. I could hear them behind me, cursing as they stumbled through the snow. Their pursuit was sloppy, arrogant. They still thought I was just prey. I scrambled over a large boulder and dropped down on the other side, concealing myself in the shadows. I held my breath, my knife tight in my hand. One of the men came crashing through the brush first, ahead of the others. He was breathing hard, his pistol held loosely. He passed my position. I exploded from the shadows. I drove my shoulder into the back of his knees, sending him pitching forward into the snow. Before he could cry out, I was on him. My knife found its mark. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel a thing. It was cold, mechanical work. I took his pistol and his ammunition belt. The odds had just gotten a little better. I melted back into the trees as Thorne and the last man came into view. "Harris, where are you?" The man called out nervously. There was no answer. The silence of the woods pressed in on them. "Spread out," Thorne ordered, his voice tight with anger. "Find him." They separated, moving cautiously through the trees. It was the mistake I was counting on. I was the predator now. I was the ghost in these woods. I stalked the second man. He was jumpy, spinning at every sound. I used the terrain, moving from tree to tree, silent as a shadow. He stopped, his back to a thick pine, trying to get his bearings. I didn't use the gun. A gunshot would give my position away to Thorne. I used the knife. Now it was just me and him, the man who had taken everything. He had to know his men were gone. I saw him standing in a small clearing, slowly turning in a circle, his pistol raised. The hunter had become the hunted. "Hail!" he shouted, his voice betraying a sliver of fear. "Show yourself. Let's end this like men." "We will," my voice echoed from the trees. "But you're no man." I circled him, staying in the shadows. I wanted him to feel it, the fear, the helplessness, the certainty that death was coming for him out of the darkness. The same fear my wife and daughter must have felt. "Who are you?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "You already killed me once," I called out, "on a ranch near Willow Creek. You and your friends from the railroad." I saw him freeze. In the dim light, I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He finally remembered. He finally understood. "It can't be," he whispered. "You burned the wrong man's family," I said, stepping out from behind a tree, the stolen pistol now leveled at his chest. His face was a mask of shock and disbelief. He raised his own pistol, but he was too slow. I was faster. My years of solitude and anger had been honing me to a razor's edge for this exact moment. My shot hit him in the shoulder, the same place I'd shot his man. His gun clattered to the snow. He staggered back, clutching his arm, a look of pure hatred on his face. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "Killing me won't bring them back." "I know," I said, walking slowly toward him. "It's not about bringing them back. It's about making sure you never burn another family again." He lunged at me, his good arm reaching for my throat. We fell into the snow, a tangle of limbs in desperation. He was strong, fueled by rage and survival. But I was fueled by something more. I was fueled by ghosts. We rolled and grappled in the snow. He got his hands on my knife. He swung it wildly, slicing my arm. Pain shot up to my shoulder, hot and sharp. He raised the knife for a final blow. I didn't try to stop the knife. I slammed the butt of the pistol into his temple. Once, twice. He grunted, his eyes glazing over. The knife fell from his hand. He slumped onto his back, dazed and bleeding. I stood over him, my chest heaving, the pistol aimed at his head. This was it, the moment I had dreamed of for 5 long years. The moment of vengeance. I could pull the trigger and it would all be over. His reign of terror, my years of pain, all of it erased with one bullet. I saw Sarah's face in my mind. I saw Lily's smile. I thought about the man I used to be, before Thorne had turned me into this creature of vengeance. That man wouldn't want this. He wouldn't want another killing to be his legacy. And I thought about Alara and her son. A new life, a new future. Vengeance was about the past. Justice, justice was about the future. I lowered the pistol. "You're not worth the bullet," I growled. I tore a strip from his coat and tied his hands behind his back. I pulled him to his feet. He looked at me bewildered. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Taking you to the marshal," I said. "You're going to face the law you thought you owned. You're going to stand trial for Samuel, for my family, for all the people you've destroyed. You're going to lose everything just like I did, and you're going to do it living and breathing." Death was an escape. I wasn't going to give him that. I found Alara huddled in a small, sheltered cave not far from where I'd left her. She was terrified but safe. The baby was asleep against her chest. When she saw me, bruised and bleeding but alive, she burst into tears of relief. And when she saw Thorn, bound and defeated, being dragged behind me, her expression turned to one of stunned disbelief. "It's over," I told her. The journey to Stone Creek took 2 days. It was a long, hard walk through the snow, with our prisoner in tow. We didn't talk much. There was nothing left to say. The truth of my past lay between us, a stark and brutal thing. When we walked into the U.S. Marshal's office, dragging a battered and tied Marcus Thorne behind us, the lawman nearly dropped his coffee cup. I laid Samuel's key on his desk. "This opens a deposit box in redemption," I said. "It'll tell you everything you need to know." Then Alara told her story, and I, for the first time in 5 years, told mine. The empire Marcus Thorne had built on greed and blood crumbled to dust. The ledgers in the box were all the proof the marshal needed. The deeds were returned to their rightful owners. The town of redemption was free. Alara, as Samuel's widow and the mother of his heir, inherited what was rightfully his. She was a wealthy woman. She offered me half of it. I turned it down. Money was what had driven Thorne to evil. I wanted no part of it. "My home is gone," I said. "I have nowhere to go." She looked at me, her eyes clear and steady. "Then we'll build a new one." And so we did. We went back to the blackened patch of earth where my cabin had stood. We cleared the rubble. With her money and my labor, we built a new house, bigger than the old one, with more windows to let in the light. The silence that settled between us this time was not one of suspicion or fear. It was a comfortable silence. The silence of two people who had walked through the fire and come out the other side, scarred but whole. Sometimes I watch her with her son, who she named Samuel. I see the easy way she smiles now. I see a future where there was once only a past. The ghosts of my wife and daughter are still with me. They always will be. But now they are gentle memories, not howling specters demanding vengeance. That night, when a pregnant stranger knocked on my door in the middle of a blizzard, I thought I was letting trouble in. I was wrong. I was letting in a second chance. I opened the door to a stranger, and in doing so, I found my way back to the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe.